All right, this morning we are going to go into chapter 4 of Galatians, starting obviously at verse 1. But I'd just like to back up a little bit because when Paul says there at verse 1, what I am saying, he is referring back to what we had discussed about guardians and the law in our last session last week. And that's where it was in Galatians 3:23 to 29. But what he is doing is restating the guardian concept. If there's an underage here, he says, as long as an heir is underage, and that would be us, an heir who is underage, he is no different from a slave, although he owns the whole estate. And what is being pointed out there, he is using a concept that people would understand in the world to talk about something in the spiritual realm. And what he is saying here is we have an heir who owns this whole estate, but he's underage. It would be the same thing in this country today. If we have someone who is underage and owns property, he may have a guardian appointed to guide him through whatever, or her through whatever needs to be done with that property. That's what he's talking about here. And he is using that guardian as that was what the law was. That's what the law of Moses was. It was to guide people through. But now we don't need it, and we're going to go back through that again, because we can say, and again, we infer from what he says, that there were some problems in the congregations. There was problems with those foolish Galatians, as he called them. There were problems with them, and he is trying to get them away from the concept that the law has any purpose in the first century. I don't want to say any purpose, it's obviously we learn from it, but the idea is it doesn't guide us. We are now we're no longer under law, we are now in the faith and grace period or time, and we still are. The heir is subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by his father. And this has great impact on what he wants us to understand, because the guardians and trustees leave when the father says so. And who is the father? He's talking about God. God came, he had a covenant with Abraham, but he then had the new covenant, if you want to say it, which applied not just to Jews, but to anybody, to Gentiles as well as Jews. So what he's saying here, it has a double meaning as he's taking it through, but he is using, and for those of you who were teachers and may still be teachers, you may be teaching your husband how to wash dishes or whatever, but you may, as a teacher, one of the best ways to teach a point is to use an example. And that's what he's doing here. He's using that guardian example to say, this is the way the law was, but we don't need that anymore because our heir has reached the age and the father has given him the time, and now we have a new covenant. Jesus came, the father decided when that was going to be, and he came. So also, when we were underage, and when he's referring to underage, he's not referring to under 12 was probably the underage. Boys grew up very quickly, and by the age of 12, they were looking at becoming men in the sense. But when we were underage, we were in slavery. And they were in slavery to the law. When we consider, and we studied, probably it's been a couple of years now, we studied a lot of the law of Moses. We studied it in preparation for the Hebrews study. But we looked at the law of Moses. We looked at all of the things that they had to do. And then we add to that, in the first century, the Pharisees added additional requirements to the law of Moses. It was impossible to live within it. So there was the need for that grace. There was the need for that forgiveness. There was the need for being able to get our sins forgiven. We've seen instances where if someone did not obey the law of Moses, they were subject possibly to execution, depending on what they were doing or not doing. And as we go through this, so slavery is a good term. They were really slaves of the law, or slaves to the law. Under the elemental spiritual forces, and these are what that basically means. The version of the New International Version that I take this from says that it's basically under basic principles. We weren't around that, but they were slaves to those principles. They could not comply with that. And as the Pharisees kept adding to it, it made it even harder. And this is spiritual forces of the world. But when the set time had fully come, this is when Jesus comes, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law. Yes, the law was in effect at that time. It was one of the things that Joseph and Mary did with Jesus on the 8th day. It's okay to say it. And circumcised. I mean, it was just like that. And that, of course, we know that there were some people there at the temple when it came in to have that done who, I can't remember the guy's name, I barely remember my own name, but he had said he wanted to see the Savior before he wanted to see the Messiah before he died. He got to see the Messiah because he came in on the 8th day. But anyway, born to a woman, born under the law, and he kept the law. Remember, one of the last things he did was to have the Passover supper before he was crucified. So he kept the law, and he used unleavened bread, and he used the fruit of the vine for his body and for his blood. But he complied with the law, and got criticized when he had the audacity to heal somebody on the Sabbath, because that was forbidden. Or when his disciples didn't wash their hands before they ate. Now, I know most of you, especially those of you who are mothers and grandmothers, you always made sure your children washed their hands before they ate. That was a good thing. In fact, you played a police officer because you would say, "Show me your hands," before they went in to eat, all right? So, but those were things that he was criticized for. And when they went through the field and they were hungry and they harvested on that day, on the Sabbath day, those things were brought up and used against him. All right, now, but there at verse 5, it is to redeem those under the law. And what does redeem mean? What is redemption?
Put them back to their original state.
put him back to the original state. Because when a child is born, that child has no sin. Now, I know we have infant baptisms. And have any of you ever attended an infant baptism?
An infant?
An infant baptism,
The
yeah.
Catholics do that.
I witnessed one, and all the child did was cry. Said nothing, got sprinkled, and cried some more. And it was that is not a redemption. That is not it's not the same as baptism. But anyway, moving, and in order to be baptized, of course, a child has to know and has to acknowledge and you cannot be 8 days old and be baptized. All right, so a woman born under the law to redeem those under the law, that they might receive adoption to sonship. Now that is important there. That term, adoption to sonship, is very important, because what Paul is saying there is that because you are his sons, we are now adopted, and as God's adopted children, we receive the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, as it says there in verse 6. Because you are his sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son, capital S, Jesus, into our hearts. The Spirit who calls out Abba, and we know what Abba is, that is the word for father or papa, more of an informal word, father. So you are no longer a slave, but God's child. Now he is making it very clear to the Galatians that the law is done. It is ended. And we wouldn't want to live under that law anyway. And he also wants to make sure they understand that there has been a replacement there. Because again, there were people who were very devout Jews who, when they converted to Christianity, believed they still had to do the same things that they did as a Jew. They had to fast, they had to do this, they had to go to these, they had to have the Passover supper and observe other holidays, if you will, holy days, as they did as Jews. And we can infer from this, although he doesn't speak directly to the Gentiles, Gentiles had a lot of, in their religion as a Gentile, they worshiped Baal. They had Asherah poles. They had all of those sorts of things, to include, in some instances, they would sacrifice babies for the god, the Gentilian god, the pagan god. Now, we don't hear a lot about that because apparently that was not as much of a problem in Galatia as wanting to either move back to the Jewish religious practices or incorporate them with our current status as kind of a double insurance policy there. We can get grace, and we can get that from being a son of God now, the sonship, an adopted son. But at the same time, wouldn't it be good to go ahead and do what we've been doing, what our ancestors have been doing for thousands of years, to ensure that we got that base covered? And he is trying to convince them that that is not what they should be doing. And so you are no longer a slave, but God's child. And since you are his child, God has made you also an heir. And that's an heir to salvation. And it's on a spiritual level rather than it was certainly when they slaughtered the lambs and did all of that, all of those activities that the Jewish law required, the law of Moses required for them, it's a different way in which they excuse me, are forgiven. Now, in my NIV, yeah, I wrote the NIV. I'm beginning to sound like some of our, I won't say anything about the presidential election, but they have come up with some stories. Yeah, I wrote the NIV. Okay. I did not. But in my version of it, the next part there before verse 8 is Paul's concern for the Galatians. Now, Paul was really, and I mean, he was having a very hard time with them because he was so concerned about them. And one of the things that makes it even more difficult, he has to write to them. It would be, there's no instance that he was there personally. And you and I know that if we have a problem with somebody, writing them a letter is certainly one way of dealing with it. Sending them an email is the modern day of dealing with that. But being right there to talk to them is much better. But he can't do that. And he hasn't done that here. So he is trying desperately to get them to get back on track because he is concerned with them. Formerly, when you did not know God, there's a verse 8, formerly, now he's going back again and he's coming forward again. You did not know God, you were slaves to those who by nature are not gods. Now that could also apply to the Gentiles, because the Gentiles had a number of gods. We know that from studying Jeremiah, we know that how the Jews went off and started worshiping gods other than God. And what were the first 3 commandments of the 10 commandments? They dealt with God. You shall have no other gods before you. And that's lowercase and plural. And so now he is saying, but now you know God, capital G. And, or rather, are known by God. Both of those are important. They know the one God, and the one God knows them. That's the relationship that all of this was leading up to. How is it that you are turning your back on those weak and miserable forces? And what that is talking about are those principles. Why do you want to go back when you've got all of this in the present and for the future? Any comments on that?
We're creatures of habits.
Yes. Yeah. And how many, let's just put this, we'll take it out of a religious sense, but how many of us are sometimes comfortable with the way we do things and we don't want to change it, even though that electric vacuum cleaner would be better than just the broom? All right, sometimes we're very comfortable where we are, and I think to an extent as humans that's where they were. They had grown up as Jews. They had, at 12, they'd been circumcised at 8 days, and then at age 12, they were now adults in the Jewish religion, and as a result, we're happy with this. We don't want to change. All right, but now that let's go on here. Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? And the them there that he's talking about are those principles. Do you want to go back to the law of Moses? Do you want to be slaves to the law of Moses all over again? And of course, you would think with as many things as they had to do to follow the law of Moses, they would be happy to be free from that. But no, they wanted to go that way.
Don't you think we like to have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 things that we need to do, and that makes us happy?
Yes,
I mean, I'll make my 5 and you make your 5, and we'll all make our 5, and then if you
Yes.
don't live up to my 5, then we're wrong. So
yeah,
everybody
yes.
kind of likes to have their
And then-
area of
And then
what
we
they
can,
feel is,
yes, and we can end it with a high five,
yeah.
You know,
because we're doing the 5.
We're
All
doing
right, yes.
You know, you said to feel comfortable. I've had a sermon about a comfort zone. You have to get out of your comfort zones to be able to be serving God. I find out that a lot of us, or even myself, because of television, because of when we were growing up and what we were gathering to grow up, the concepts that we were getting constantly by learning and going to school or learning from different people. God is still changing you. You can't be so comfortable because God is still working on you.
Yes.
And His grace is sufficient, but you never can give up. There's always something to keep learning. When I feel comfortable, especially to be in the social contact is kind of hard because
Yes.
there's some things that I don't do, others do, and I question that, but then there's peace of God, there's grace, and there's, God has changed me, and I have to be able to know that He can change others. So I know that God's grace is sufficient for me, like the Apostle Paul said.
And then at verse 10, and I think this is what he's getting at for both Jew and Gentile there, you are observing special days. They continued, we can infer from that the Church of Galatia continued to observe Passover and all of the others, and there are a number of them, Yom Kippur and some of those, and special months and special seasons and special years, because remember there were the years where every 10th year, I don't remember.
Jubilee.
What was that?
Jubilee.
Jubilee. And they would observe that. I don't know if did they ever get to it, or some of them didn't get to it. They didn't live long enough to get to it. Because Jubilee was like every 50th year. When you consider the average lifespan in the first century, it was in the high 30s. So all of us have just blown past that, I guess, right? All of you have, all of you are over 30. Yes, ma'am.
So this verse is referring to the Jewish customs rather than the pagan customs that the Gentiles who were in Galatia were they always familiar, the Gentiles, with the customs of the Jews to celebrate these special days?
The Jewish Christians were, because they had done that.
Right.
But the Gentiles had their days, holidays as well. And he's probably talking to both, since both the Christians come from both of those groups. We can infer that probably they like to do, set off the fireworks on the 4th of July kind of concept, that they had been doing that forever and they wanted to continue it. But as a religious function, no, he is telling them, you are observing these things. And then at verse 11, this, if I knew Paul either personally or through the letters, he says, I fear for you. That should send chills up and down their spine, shouldn't it? I fear for you. That somehow I have wasted my efforts on you. And now he's kind of taking blame here, but again, I think we can infer from this that he would like to be talking to them face to face, because he can make these points a lot better and get their immediate response, and then he can immediately respond back. But instead he has to do it this way, and he's doing inspired effort here. But the problem that he's got is he's now wondering, did I waste all that effort on you when you first became Christians? I plead with you, brothers and sisters. Plead with them. He does have concern for them. It's a concern that many of you have, many of us may have had or have, with a family member who is not in the fold, or a family member who was in the fold but is now out and may come back next week or may not, because he is concerned about them.
I think a lot about this.
What's
I
that?
have my opinion. That's your, if I was to say what he said, I am afraid for you, lest I have labor for you in vain. Paul said that with a caring, exhorting way. But when I say that to my family, they say, well, it's only your opinion. You're not God, you know?
Well,
It just, it makes me feel like
you're
that.
just a servant of God.
And I thought, well, there's a lot more I have to say, you know, but I can't,
And you're a messenger of God.
you know, but they don't want to hear that.
Yeah,
But it's interesting, there's not only them, there's a lot of people who are that.
that's right. And that's
But
what
you
Paul's
still have to
facing.
talk to them.
That's what Paul is facing here, just what we face in our lives. I plead with you, brothers and sisters, become like me, for I became like you. You did me no wrong. As you know, it was because of an illness that I first preached the gospel to you. And I looked this up. I looked in the Bible that I use, and they did not know what the illness may have been. And I don't recall. Of course, I don't recall a lot of it, a lot of things, but I don't recall much in the book of Acts and his other letters about any kind of an illness that caused him to either go there. It could have been an illness of one of the members, and he went there and preached or whatever. As you know, it was because of an illness that I first preached to you, and even though my illness was a trial to you, you did not treat me with contempt or scorn. When he started out, he had a good relationship with them. Because sometimes I think, you think of this, if somebody wants to tell us something new, and in this religion, when he went and spoke to the Jews, what would be their reaction to him? Very likely, it would be contempt and scorn. I mean, look what they did to Stephen when he pointed out all of these things in person. They killed him. They executed him. And I can say that I've never been, got to be very careful how you word this. I've never been stoned. And I don't mean that. I mean the one with rocks. Okay. Now, I've seen some people who have been stoned the other way, but you know. But the point is that it was not a quick death. It was a very painful death. And it was made that way. It was made that way. So when people saw Stephen being stoned, it would have an impact on Jews who were considering Christianity. Now we're inferring a lot from that, but that's what it was about. It was to deter that conduct. All right. Instead, you welcomed me as if I were an angel of God or as if I were Jesus Christ himself. Now that's a pretty tall company. That's a pretty important company. They had a great respect for him. They were so happy to see him. Now the problem that comes up though is they are far and away. Well, not all. I'm sure there were many who were still good Christians serving God, but there were so many who were not treating him any longer as an angel of God or any longer as Jesus himself. And and again, he's handicapped because he has to write to them and really can't talk to them in person. Where then is your blessing of me now? So they have been disagreeing with him and he knows it. And again, if he'd been there personally, I think they would have had an up close and personal contact there and may have been able to move through this faster than writing a letter to them. Where then is your blessing of me now? I can testify that if you could have done so, you would have torn out my eyes and given them to me. Okay? So maybe it's a good thing he wasn't in their presence, because apparently they had become very hostile. And one thing about religion is it has a very significant emotional factor to it. We believe, and we believe it because we believe it, and we believe it firmly. So, if you come along and try to tell me something else, and I'm talking now about we want to circumcise, we want to have the Passover and all of that. If we want to do that, then if you tell me something else, gouging an eye out was, remember, I think there's a passage in, when we studied Jeremiah, I think we studied where one of the enemies of the Jews said, okay, here's the deal. We will not attack you if we can gouge your eyes out. Now, what a deal that is, right? You either get attacked or you get your eyes gouged out. Or it could happen both ways. You lose the war. So this was something that I have to believe was not just threatened, but may have been used. So when he says that, he means that's what you may have done. Any comments on that?
If he's saying that they would have given their eyes for him, not that they were going to take his eyes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Boy, I misread that. When I wrote that, I knew what I was writing. Thank you. That's a good point. You would have torn. In other words, what he is saying there is, at that time, when he was treated as an angel and treated as Jesus, they'd have done anything for him. Because how many of us want to be able to see and hear? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What'd you say? But, yes, sir.
Thinking back, this also kind of gives you an idea of what Paul's ailment may have been. May have been his eyes.
It could have been. It could have been.
There have been some talk by historians that may have had the thing where there was an eyelash growing the wrong direction, growing in against his eye and rubbed against the eye itself.
And because at some points he had people writing it for him, the idea was that he probably couldn't see that well. That's a good point. Any other good points?
I don't know if it's a good point or not.
We'll be the judge of that.
You know,
Yes.
sometimes when you look at Christianity, it seems like it's supposed to be so simple and so easy. And so, you know, you have certain things that you do. You worship God, you've got grace, you've got peace, but then sometimes people think, well, I've got to do something else. I've got to do something to prove that I'm following Christ. And I'm wondering if that wasn't part of their problem. If they thought, you know, this just, all the stuff we had to do as Jews, all the things, it just didn't seem like this was gonna be enough.
Yeah,
At least to some of them, maybe not all of them.
Yeah.
But then once, all you do is introduce a thought to a group. Maybe we should add this, just to make sure we're safe. I don't wanna make sure that we're losing everything. So if we go a little bit with this, a little bit with that, we've got to be safe.
and I think that's why some of them they didn't want to go back to the law, but they wanted to bring the law forward and put it together
Yeah.
with what they have. And now we're really safe. This is like being insured by Allstate. Yes.
It's almost like having a checklist of things that you have to do.
That makes it very easy. And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many of you sometimes will get so overcome with what you have to do? You write everything down, and then you do start checking it off. Not as part of religion, but as part of your everyday life. And isn't it wonderful that you can put it on your cell phone and take it with you? Okay, and you can check it off as you go. But that is true. And I think, and some people have to live that way. Because a spiritual thing is not, well, we can't see it. We can see the results of it. We can't hear it, but we can hear the results of it. But the point of it is, because it's spiritual, it's just hard for us to see it. And I've heard people who are very devout in the church, say, I just don't think I'm doing enough. And they get on sort of a guilt trip, self-imposed guilt trip. And that can be a problem. Okay, now that we've got all of those problems solved, this is kind of like we're trying to help you through life, All right, but we are. Have I now become your enemy by telling the truth? That's verse 16. Boy, is that impactful. He was at one time their friend, but now he is asking them, am I your enemy? Because I am telling you the truth. Clearly, there was some very serious disagreements here. All right, now those people are zealous to win you over. Now, those people he's talking about are the Judaizers, those who wanted to add the law of Moses to the Christian, to Christians, to win you over, but for no good. What they want is to alienate you from us. And we know there are people who want to do that in this day and age. Alienate. Don't go over there with those people. They're weird. Come with us. So that you may have zeal for them. And the true plan of the zealots is basically false teachings. And those who were being zealous about this were false teachers. They were teaching you have to be circumcised. You have to obey certain of the Mosaic laws in order to be saved, in addition to being a Christian. And then some say Christianity is a fraud. I mean, who would believe that God, I'm an Israelite now, the God of my generations and generations and generations ago would pick a Messiah who would be the son of a carpenter from Nazareth? Now, come on. It's not going to do that. So many of them didn't believe it to begin with. And he says there at verse 18, this is a personal statement. It is fine to be zealous. Well, if anybody was zealous, Paul fits that definition, doesn't he? Provided the purpose is good, and to be so always, not just while or when I am with you. So now we may see a little bit more, may infer something else here. But while he was there, things went well. But then when he left, it didn't go so well. And that's why he is really, the undertoning here is that he's frustrated. And it's because he can't be there. All right? My dear children. Who does that sound like? Starts with J and ends in an N. John Tom called in a lot of his writings said, my little children. But here he says, my dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. How I wish I could be with you and change my tone, because I am perplexed about you. Now we're not in overtime yet because the bell hasn't rung, but there are several things here. Pains of childhood. Does anybody want to say, oh, it's easy, it was no problem? No. It's very painful. He is using that as an example of how pain he is. And I will be that way till Christ is formed in you. How I wish I could be with you now and change my tone. He could tone it down, but he is making it, he's got to make it so, there you go. He's got to make it like so the bell rings, but he's got to make it so they clearly understand it, and he doesn't have a lot of time to do it. These letters, and of course, if he's got eyesight problems, that could be a problem. And then I am perplexed about you, and next week we'll find out what that means. But and we cut it off maybe a little early, but what verse 21 deals with is, do you really know what the law of Moses is? And do you really want to go back to it? Okay. All right, next time it's there to the end of the chapter, 21 through 31, and it's entitled "Do Not Listen to the Law." But I think the bottom line there is, be careful. Do you know what it's all about? Do you know what you would have to do to go back to that? All right, thank you very much. We appreciate it.